Hello everyone, it's Lisa Tilson here today for Picket Fence Studios. I'm going to be creating two cards for you today, and here's a little sneak peek of what I'm going to show you. I'm going to use the new Iconic Beauty Sara stamp set, and I'm going to show you two different ways to create your backgrounds. For the first card, we're going to do some ink smooshing. So I've got 4 distress inks here. I've got Sponge Sugar, Kitsch Flamingo, Dried Marigold and Picked Raspberry. And I'm going to use some Tim Holtz Distress Watercolour cardstock. And there is a side on this cardstock that is less textured than the other, and that is the side that I'm going to use today. So first of all, I'm putting some sponge sugar down onto my mat, and I'm just going to spritz it a couple of times with some water. And here I'm just pouncing the cardstock down into that ink, and I'm taking a look at it as I go just to see where the ink is actually sitting on the panel. But I do want this lightest colour to be visible all over the card. As I progress through the card, you'll see that I add more colours sort of to the bottom and up towards the top right hand side, but I definitely wanted the lightest pink to be visible all over. So here I've added some dried marigold onto the mat. Again, I spritzed it with some water, and I'm going to go through the same process, but I'm just going to add that ink more towards the bottom and the right hand side. And you'll notice as I try to get some ink into the centre, I have to sort of bend my cardstock over. That's okay, you can certainly get the ink on that way, and I dab off the bits where I think I've got too much ink, and I just carry on adding in bits of ink and taking a little bit off maybe, and just checking to see what it looks like as I go along. And I will show you a way of adding that ink in a more precise fashion when I come to the last colour. But for now, I'm just going to clean off my mat, and then I'm going to add in some Kitsch Flamingo. So I've smushed some down onto my mat there, as you can see. I don't know whether my Kitsch Flamingo cube is a little bit dry, but I sometimes feel when I'm using it to blend, it is the mini cube, that I'm not getting quite as much colour as I think I should, and I didn't want to lose it amongst the sponge sugar. So what I thought I would do at this point is dry off my panel. You don't have to do that. I just thought that if I dried off first, when I add the Kitsch Flamingo, I felt like it was going to be more visible, and it will mean that you get some harsher lines because you've dried the couple of layers underneath, but that doesn't matter. This is supposed to be an abstract panel, it's not supposed to be precise, and it's all about creating interest. So I dabbed some of the Kitsch Flamingo on, and actually it did come out darker than I thought, but I go in there and I add a little bit down, a little bit more down on the mat, spritz again, and I go through and add a little bit more of that darker pink. And all the while I'm just checking to see whether I'm happy with the distribution of colour, and I'm happy with how it looks so far. So I've cleaned off my mat, and I'm now going to add the final colour, which is Picked Raspberry. And I'm going to show you a different way of adding this onto the panel because it is such a strong colour. I really didn't want big splotches of it everywhere on the panel, and it is harder to control that when you actually pounce the panel down into the ink. So what I'm doing here is I've taken some stamp packaging, and I'm just going to cut a small square out of that. The larger the square you cut, the less control you'll have when you add your ink. So I cut a really small square, and I just pounce that into the ink, and then I add it onto the panel in that way. And you can see here that you can be just much more precise about where that colour goes down. I never get tired of watching ink mix together or paint mix together. I just love seeing it move and seeing the colours that result when it mixes together. But I'm carrying on here, just dabbing bits of the Picked Raspberry in where I think I need it. And then I cleaned off my mat and I thought, no, I'm going to add some more dried marigolds. So I cleaned the acetate off and then I just added a little bit more of dried marigold in here and there. I probably really didn't need to, but at this point I'm enjoying the process and thinking, oh yes, I'll just make it a little bit stronger there, but I could have left it as it was. And eventually I stop and I clean off my mat and then I heat set it. We're going to move on to our second background now, and I've cut some panels of cardstock. That's just £110 Nina, and we're going to do this using the gel press. So I've got 4 different distress inks: Mermaid Lagoon, Lucky Clover, Cracked Pistachio and Tumbled Glass. And I'm now just going to swipe that over my gel press. So at the top and the bottom I've put some Mermaid Lagoon, then I go in with a couple of stripes of Lucky Clover, and then I'm just going to swipe Tumbled Glass over that. You might get a little bit of contamination on your ink pad, but you can just dab that off onto some spare paper and you should be able to clean it up. And the final colour that I added there was Cracked Pistachio. And I'm taking my brayer here and I'm actually pressing quite hard onto the gel press. What I wanted to achieve on this panel was that I wanted to be able to see the lines from the brayer. I wouldn't normally want that. I would normally try and avoid getting or seeing those lines that you get from the edge of the brayer, but I thought it would make it more interesting on this panel. So I laid my cardstock down and I put some scratch paper on top, and then I just rubbed over it to make sure that I would get an even coverage, and I've peeled up the panel, and actually I really like how that turned out. I did cut extra white panels because I wasn't sure how this was going to go, but I did think it looked really interesting, the first panel, but I did have that little bit of white on the top left hand corner that I wasn't really happy with, so I thought I would go ahead and make another panel. So I'm using the same colours again, Mermaid Lagoon at the top and the bottom, then I'm adding in a stripe of Lucky Clover again at the top and the bottom. I add some Cracked Pistachio and I finish with Tumbled Glass. Going in with the brayer again just to create those lines. I honestly think I could play around with my gel press and inks all day. I really love seeing how things come out and seeing the different combinations of colour. And here's the fun bit, when you pull it back and you reveal what you've actually created, and I'm happy with that. But here is a look at all 3. You definitely could use either one of those 2 panels, but I decided to use the one on the right in the end. I will keep the one on the left for another project. And I'm now going to go ahead and I'm going to add in Iconic Beauty Sara onto both of the backgrounds. Isn't she just gorgeous? She was one of my favourite stamps from this month's release, so I'm really happy to get her on a couple of cards. I'm just working out here exactly where I want her positioned. So in the end I decided I wanted her slightly offset at the side and at the bottom. I'm taking some Picket Fence Studios Black Hybrid ink, and then I'm adding that onto the stamp, and I'm just going to press that down firmly onto that cardstock. Now, because this is a watercolour cardstock, even though I have used the less textured side, I do need to stamp this several times, and in the end I think I stamped it 4 times just to make sure that I got the depth of black that I actually wanted. And apologies that I'm in frame here, but I did want to press down really firmly to make sure that I got all the detail. And now we're going to move on to our second background, and I thought I would do a mini slimline card with this one. So I'm just taking these stitched and Scalloped rectangle die here, and I'm moving it around the panel just to see where I think I want Sara to be. And once I'm happy with where she's positioned, I put the misty lid down, pick her up, and I add the ink. And for this panel I only need to stamp her twice because this was a Nina £110 panel. It's much smoother, and therefore the ink goes on a little bit easier. And now that we've stamped up both of our panels, I thought I would go ahead and add some extra interest onto both by using some stencils. So for this first card here, I've taken the Geo Squares stencil and two of the inks that I used in the smooshing process. So I've got Dried Marigold and Kitsch Flamingo there. And using a small life-changing blender brush, I'm going to apply first of all the Kitsch Flamingo Distress ink, and I'm applying it randomly across the panel. I'm just peeling that back to see how heavy the ink has been applied, just to make sure that it's visible, and I really just go ahead and put that through the stencil in different areas across the panel, and I do the same for the Dried Marigold as well. And I keep lifting the stencil here just to double check that I'm happy with how it looks. So my tape on the left hand side acts as a kind of hinge really, which makes it really easy to just keep picking it up and placing it back down. And to be honest, you probably didn't need any extra interest on this panel. It is busy enough with the smooshing, but because the Geo Squares stencil is quite an abstract stencil, I did think it would add a little bit of extra fun to this card. And this is actually quite a different card for me. I don't often add lots and lots of detail onto my panels, but it's really fun to try new things and to get more use out of your products. And because of that, I thought I would then add in some sparkle onto her hair. And as with all of the glitzes, you do need to make sure you give it a good stir. In between uses, the glitter and the mica settles at the bottom. So when you open it up, give it a good stir around just to make sure that you get the full benefit of all that lovely sparkle. And I'm using the new fan brush here to apply the sparkle over Sara. And it's my first time using this brush, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was doing, and I was a little bit heavy-handed when I first put that glitz down. And you'll see here I tried to pick it up and I just smudge it, so it didn't really matter in the final card because I end up adding quite a lot of the sparkle on. It doesn't show up that much, but I definitely got more smart about using the brush and knowing exactly how much glitz to pick up and exactly kind of how light I needed to apply that over the panel. So now we're going to go on and add our detail onto the second panel, and for this one I've taken the Slimline Broken Fences stencil and the Mermaid Lagoon Distress ink, and I'm going to go through and just apply that randomly across the panel as I did for the first one. And I only decided on one colour of distress ink for this panel because I really love Mermaid Lagoon as a colour anyway, but I thought it would look lovely over particularly over the green parts and certainly over the lighter blue area. And I do use quite a light hand when I apply the ink. Less is definitely more when you're ink blending and stenciling. You can always add more, but it's very hard to take it away. For the sparkle detail on this panel, I'm using the Paper Glitz Navy Wingtips. So I haven't used this colour yet. It's an absolutely beautiful sapphire blue. And I go ahead and I do exactly the same as I did earlier on. I make sure that I mix up the glitz really well so that I get the maximum benefit of all the glitter and mica. And this time I thought I'd add a little bit of the glitz onto my mat so that I'm actually going to pick up from there rather than picking up from the pot. I'm making sure to clean off my spatula, and also what I normally do is I clean the top of my paper glitz jar before I put the cap back on, just to make sure that I don't have any residue, or it can stick a little bit, but I do go back and do that after the video. So for now I'm just dabbing the brush into that little bit of navy wingtips on my mat, and I'm dabbing it with a very, very light hand over Sara. And I was definitely more successful second time around. We can now take a look at the two cards and see all that gorgeous glittery sparkle. It was actually quite overcast and grey when I filmed the video, so it doesn't show it at its best, but I promise you they are really sparkly in real life, and they look so pretty when you hold them into the light. So we're going to move on now to adding our sentiments onto the panels. And for the first card I'm using the Be Real Not Perfect sentiment, and I'm going to stamp that down a couple of times onto my cardstock. Now you'll remember that this is the watercolour cardstock, so therefore it does have a slight texture to it, so I do need to double stamp that just to make sure that it's really nice and crisp. For the second card I'm using the I Hope You Feel Beautiful Today sentiment, which I really love. And I toyed with where to put this sentiment. In the end I put it at the top of the panel. I played it safe. I did think it might look fun down the left hand side, kind of aligned with the image on its side, but I didn't want to spoil my card at this point, so in the end I put it at the top, but maybe I'll make another card and put it on its side and see what I think. And here are the final two cards assembled. So for the first one I just matted my panel onto some hot pink cardstock and then onto an A2 top folding note card. For the second one I did put some foam tape on the back of the ink blended panel, and that was then just adhered onto a mini slimline note card. And I'm checking the back there just to make sure I haven't got any ink on it. I often manage to get ink on the back of my cards. And that brings us to the end of the video for today. I hope you've enjoyed seeing the cards come together, and thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful day.